What would you do if I told you France just made nearly 13 billion euros by moving gold without really moving gold? No war, no headlines, no emergency speech. Just one quiet decision that may tell us where the global financial system is going next. And here is the real twist. This was not only about gold. It was about trust. Because when central banks stop trusting the old system, money itself starts telling a different story. For years, many countries kept part of their national gold reserves outside their own borders. That sounds strange at first. Gold is supposed to be your emergency asset, your final backup, your last line of financial defense. So why would you store it in another country? The answer is history. After World War II, the global financial system was built around a small group of powerful Western institutions. New York and London became the main vaults of the world. Holding gold there made trading easier. It gave countries fast access to markets. It fit the system. And for decades, that system worked. Or at least, it looked like it worked. But now the world is changing. Trust is lower. Alliances are weaker. Political risk is higher. Sanctions can freeze assets. Foreign policy can change fast. One election can alter global relationships overnight. And in that kind of world, countries start asking a dangerous question. What if our gold is safe? Until the day it isn't. That is why what France did matters so much. Because this was not some random accounting trick. This was a signal. A signal that financial sovereignty is no longer theory. It is strategy. And gold, of all things, is back at the center of that strategy. Funny, right? We built a digital world, and now everyone is running back to metal. That alone should get your attention. France did not just adjust its reserves, it redefined control over them. Instead of leaving part of its gold tied to old international storage habits, it sold gold held abroad and bought the same amount back in Europe in a newer, globally tradable form. That move helped the country improve the quality of its reserves, lock in gains during high gold prices, and bring everything under domestic control. That is not just smart treasury management. That is financial chess. And once one major country makes a move like that, everyone else starts looking at the board. Let's start with the numbers, because this is where the story gets serious. France restructured part of its gold reserves and generated about 12.8 billion euros in capital gains from 129 tons of gold. Read that again. Not from launching a new industry, not from raising taxes, not from cutting pensions, from gold management. That is the kind of move that makes finance ministers sit up straight. France did not simply drag bars across the ocean like some old pirate movie. That would have been expensive, slow, and politically loud. Instead, the Bank of France used a cleaner, more modern method. It sold the gold stored in the United States and repurchased the same amount in Europe in internationally compliant bullion. That allowed it to solve two problems at once. First, it brought control closer to home. Second, it upgraded older non-standard bars into gold that fits today's global trading standards. This matters more than most people think. In finance, quality is not only about having an asset. It is about having an asset that can be used quickly, valued easily, and accepted everywhere. A dusty old bar in the wrong format is still gold, yes. But modern compliant bullion is liquid power. France understood that. And timing helped too. Gold prices were strong, very strong. So by restructuring during favorable market conditions, France turned reserve management into a profit engine. That profit helped fuel a dramatic turnaround in the central bank's financial results. One year, there was a major loss. The next, a major profit. That is the difference between passive storage and active strategy. Pattern interrupt. Gold just became more exciting than most tech stocks. Now here is the deeper point. Countries usually talk about reserves in defensive terms: safety, stability, insurance. France treated reserves as something more dynamic. not gambling, not speculation, optimization. That is a very different mindset. And once a country starts optimizing its gold in a world full of geopolitical stress, you have to ask, is this still just reserve management? Or is this the beginning of a new financial doctrine? Because when the fourth largest gold holder in the world decides all of its gold should be under national control, markets notice. Maybe not on day one, but central banks definitely notice. Now let's look at Germany. Germany holds one of the largest gold reserves on Earth. Yet a large share of that gold remains stored abroad, especially in the United States. That arrangement goes back decades. It was shaped by the Cold War, post-war politics, and the structure of the Western financial order. At the time, it made sense. The world was divided. The dollar system was dominant. Major financial centers felt secure. Storing gold abroad gave flexibility and protection under that old logic. But here is the problem. History writes the contract. Politics rewrites it. And politics today is not calm. In Germany, the question of foreign stored gold keeps returning because the logic of the old system looks weaker than it used to. Critics argue that keeping such a large share of national reserves abroad creates unnecessary exposure, not because the gold is guaranteed to disappear tomorrow, but because strategic risk is no longer hypothetical. That is the key shift. The discussion is no longer, is our gold technically safe? It is, why should we depend on another power at all? Those are very different questions. The first is operational. The second is sovereign. France answered that question with action. Germany is still stuck in debate. And debates are expensive when the world moves faster than your committee meetings. Little joke there, but also not really a joke. Because gold is not only a store of value. In times of crisis, it becomes political leverage, monetary credibility, and psychological confidence all at once. If a nation faces financial panic, external pressure, or a shock to the banking system, gold at home feels different from gold on paper in another jurisdiction. People understand that instinctively. Governments do too. And that is why France's move may increase pressure on Germany. Not because France told Germany what to do, but because France showed that bringing reserves home can be framed as financially smart, technically efficient, and politically reasonable all at once. That is powerful. Before, bringing gold home sounded emotional or symbolic. Now it can be sold as disciplined financial management. That changes the conversation. And once the conversation changes, policy can follow. Now take Italy. Italy also holds large gold reserves, and like several other countries, it keeps meaningful portions abroad in places like New York, London, and Switzerland. Again, this is not some accident. It is the legacy of an older global system where trust in international custodians was part of being a serious financial power. But Europe today is in a different place. The continent faces slower growth, higher debt pressure, energy uncertainty, political fragmentation, and growing questions about long-term strategic independence. In that environment, gold stops being a boring central bank line item. It becomes a symbol of optionality. And optionality is everything in finance. What is optionality? It is the ability to act when conditions change. It is the power to respond without asking permission. It is what investors want, what companies pay for, and what states increasingly value. Gold at home gives more optionality than gold abroad. Simple as that. That does not mean every country will repatriate all its reserves tomorrow. But the logic is shifting. France has made it easier for other governments to say, we are not being extreme, we are being prudent. That is the language of every major financial transition. Nobody ever says, we are panicking. They say, we are rebalancing. Nobody says, we are losing faith in the old order. They say, we are updating our reserve strategy. And maybe that is true. But language in finance is often like wrapping paper. The real gift is underneath. Pattern interrupt. When central banks start using softer words, pay even more attention. France's decision sends a message far beyond Paris. It says this: in a world of rising uncertainty, direct control is worth more than shared assumptions. That matters not only for gold, but for energy, payment systems, trade routes, defense supply chains, semiconductors, and capital markets. Once the age of easy trust ends, every system gets reviewed. Gold is just one of the first pieces on the table. What France actually understood. So what is the solution here? It is not simply, everyone bring all the gold home immediately. That is too simple. The real solution is smarter reserve strategy built around three principles. First, control beats convenience. For decades, convenience ruled global finance. Put assets where the market is deepest. Use the biggest hubs. Trust the network. But in an unstable world, convenience becomes dependency. France understood that the convenience of foreign storage was no longer enough to justify the strategic weakness that came with it. That is a major lesson for countries, investors, and even ordinary people. Ease is nice. Control is better. Second, reserves should be modern, liquid, and usable. France did not only care about location, it cared about quality. That is huge. Because in finance, old assets that cannot move easily or meet modern standards create friction, and friction kills speed. In a crisis, speed matters. So France upgraded older bars into internationally accepted bullion while also relocating control to Europe. That is what smart financial engineering looks like when done by a state. Not flashy, not chaotic, just effective. Third, sovereignty has a balance sheet value. This might be the biggest takeaway of all. We often talk about sovereignty like it is political poetry. It is not. It has measurable financial value. When a country controls its core assets, market confidence can improve. Strategic choices become easier. Crisis management becomes cleaner. Public trust can rise. The state has more room to act. That is not ideology. That is balance sheet strength. France understood that sovereignty is not only something you defend with speeches. Sometimes you defend it with vaults, settlement standards, and good timing. And that is exactly why this move matters beyond the gold market. It shows how national strategy and financial management are merging. The old model said, spread trust across the system. The emerging model says, reduce blind reliance, increase direct control, and keep your emergency assets where your own hand can reach them. That is a very different world. And honestly, it may be the world we are entering now. Ask yourself this: if nations no longer fully trust the institutions that defined the last financial era, what comes next? More gold at home? More reserve diversification? Less dependence on the dollar infrastructure? More regional monetary blocks? These are not fringe questions anymore. These are mainstream strategic questions. And France may have just made them impossible to ignore. So let's pull this together. France did something that looked technical, but carried a much bigger meaning. It restructured part of its gold reserves, made roughly 12.8 billion euros in gains, upgraded the quality of its holdings, and brought full control of its gold under domestic custody. That alone is impressive. But the bigger story is what this tells us about the world. The age of automatic trust is fading. Countries are thinking harder about where their wealth sits, who controls access to it, and what happens if the political weather changes. France moved early and quietly. Germany is still debating. Italy and others may soon face the same pressure. And gold, the oldest monetary asset in history, is suddenly becoming relevant again for the most modern reason possible: strategic independence. In plain English, France did not just make money. It bought itself more control. And in an uncertain world, control may be the most valuable asset of all. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe and stay with the channel, because this is exactly where finance, power, and global strategy collide. And tell me in the comments, Will more countries bring their gold home next, or is France an exception that others cannot afford to copy?